Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 680, and today is October 1st, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a lot of news to get through on today's show, but first want to mention a word from our sponsor, and that is the Expat Money Summit 2024, which is the world's largest offshore event. It's taking place entirely online, so you can attend no matter where you're at right now. And it's next week, October 7th through the 11th. So to get your complimentary, that's free ticket, head on over to expatmoneysummit.com. Again, that's expatmoneysummit.com. Or use the affiliate link in the show notes page. And I know quite a few of you have already gotten your ticket through that link. I really appreciate for those of you who are doing that. It's showing that my audience does support our sponsors. So if you haven't, again, head on over and at least get your free ticket to this event. And look, you're getting a great ticket. Of course, it's hosted by Mikhail Thorup, the host of the Expat Money Show. I've been on his podcast. I really like Mikhail. And he put together a great lineup of speakers, including Ron Paul, Tom Woods, and Scott Horton. Really no bigger names in the liberty movement than that. Myself and Dave DeCamp, along with Hervoya Mork, will be speaking on a VIP panel about World War III. Is it fear-mongering or a genuine concern? So if you go to the show notes page, there's two links there for the Expat Money Summit. One gets you your free ticket, and the other one is a promo code for $100 off a VIP ticket to the event. I will be appearing on one of the VIP panels, but there's some great stuff just getting the free ticket too. So expatmoneysummit.com. Help out the show, get yourself a ticket to a great event. Now, you can also help out the show just by sharing it. Of course, it's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts, and the best place to follow me is on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. Now let's get into the news today. Story on Russia, story on Ukraine, and then we get into everything happening in the Middle East. So first up here, West seeks to finalize using frozen Russian funds to pay for Ukraine war. I wrote this one for the Institute on the 30th. So the president of the Group of Seven, the G7, is seeking to finalize a $50 billion loan to Ukraine that will be repaid using frozen Russian funds. Using Moscow's money to pay for Kiev's war effort will be a major escalation in the economic war the U.S. is waging against Russia. So the European Commission Executive Vice President explained the G7 presidency is now aiming for a political commitment on participation in this. Loans initiative around the end of October would allow all G7 leaders sufficient time to operationalize the loans by the end of the year. So the scheme that they are talking about calls for giving Ukraine a $50 billion loan, which will is just Russian money, but they're calling it a loan. However, rather than having Kiev pay off the loan, the funds from frozen Russian assets in the G7 nations will be what repays the loans. Now, they say they're going to use the annual interest off of the Russian money. So they have, I think, about $300 billion in frozen Russian funds. And I think they estimate that'll generate between $3 and $5 billion each year in interest. And so they're going to take that money and use that to pay down the loan. Now, this means it is going to take a significant amount of time to pay off that loan. And so there are some questions here. If, let's say, that money gets unfrozen, then who's on the hook for the loan? Is it Ukraine? Is it Washington? Is it whoever country doled out the loan in the first place? So this is pretty complex. The G7 includes the US, France, Canada, Japan, Germany, Italy, and the European Union. The bulk of the money will come from members of the European Union, about $35 billion. So the European Union official reports that Canada, the UK, and Japan are all on board with the proposal. Washington is withholding support over unease that the European Union will unfreeze the Russian funds, leaving no clear method for the loan to be repaid. The EU is seeking to alleviate the White House's concern by voting to extend freezing the Russian funds by 3 years. Currently, they're doing it in 6-year span. Of course, doing it in a 3-year span is more time than a 6-month span. However, if you're talking about repaying a $50 billion loan at about $5 billion per year, it seems that it's going to take a little bit longer than 3 years to pay off that loan, and there would still be a significant balance at the end of that 3 year period. So, using the Russian money to fund the Ukrainian army killing of Russian soldiers will likely be viewed as a major provocation by Moscow. Throughout the conflict, Washington has waged an economic war alongside the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. Washington and its allies have instituted numerous rounds of sanctions and other economic penalties against Moscow aimed at slowing the Kremlin's war machine. However, the Russian economy has largely adapted to the sanctions, while cutting trade with Moscow has harmed some European economies. And so one other thing I just want to mention here is I think another problem with this, in my view, is that it really draws out the duration of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. While I don't think the Ukraine war is going to be wrapped up tomorrow, this month, or even by the end of the year, maybe sometime within the next year would be possible. This loan is going to take, I think, probably 15 years or so to repay. Again, just judging by it, there's going to be some interest, I'm sure, on the loan, the $50 billion loan that Ukraine takes. They're taking the interest generated off the Russian money, again, about $5 billion per year. And so, I mean, if they're just straight paying it down with no interest on the Ukrainian loan, it would take about 10 years to repay. But you imagine that it's going to generate some interest. And so I would guess 15 plus years to repay that loan. So that would mean that the Russian funds need to be frozen in these European economies for over the next decade in order to not have any hangups with this loan. And the problem with that is, of course, is if they do unfreeze the money, then somebody is going to be on the hook for it. And we're talking about billions of dollars. And so you could imagine voters in any of these countries would be very unhappy if their tax dollars were going to repay loans that effectively were Russian money. And now, additionally, I think it creates some problems too on what if Russia demands this money back? What if they say, no, that interest is ours, you were holding our frozen funds, and so the interest accrued on those funds is our money, and we want that. Do the West now have to go out of their pocket, effectively their taxpayers' pockets, to give Russia back this money? I think we're really creating an entanglement here with hundreds of billions of dollars that could see the war in Ukraine and the tensions between Russia and the West drawn out far longer than they need to be, because the West is coming up with this scheme to give Ukraine money rather than just sending it directly from the Western coffers, because that's become increasingly unpopular with the people from the West. All right, next up here, let's talk about the U.S. upsetting China now. Biden approves $567 million in military aid for Taiwan, angering China. So on Sunday, the White House released a brief memo stating that President Biden approved $567 million in new military aid for Taiwan, a move that has angered China. The memo said that Biden authorized Secretary of State Antony Blinken to direct the drawdown of up to $567 billion in defense articles and services of the Department of Defense in military education and training to provide assistance to Taiwan. The memo offered no details on what types of weapon would be sent to Taiwan. Earlier this month, a U.S. official told Defense News that the military aid package for Taiwan was set to be approved and would fund training, stockpiles, anti-armor weapons, air defenses, and multi-domain awareness, but they wouldn't be more specific. The military aid is being provided through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows the president to ship weapons directly from U.S. military stockpiles. Congress has authorized the provision of $1 billion in PDA funds for Taiwan each year, and the $95 billion foreign military aid bill that Biden signed in April included an additional $1.9 billion that could be used to replenish weapons sent to Taiwan. Since Washington severed diplomatic relations with Taipei in 1979, the U.S. has always sold weapons to Taiwan, but it didn't provide them free of charge or finance the purchases until last year, which marked a significant escalation in the U.S. support for the island. On Monday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry strongly denounced the new military aid for Taipei. They said, "This once again shows that the separatist moves for Taiwan's independence and convenience and support for such moves from the U.S.-led external force are the biggest threats facing the cross-strait peace and stability and cause the greatest disruption to the real status quo in the Taiwan Strait, says the Taiwanese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Wen. Adding, we urge the U.S. to earnestly abide by the One China principle and the Three China U.S. joint communique, and to stop arming Taiwan in any form. No matter how many weapons the U.S. provides to the Taiwan region, it will never weaken our firm opposing to Taiwan independence and safeguard for China's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Chinese officials, including President Xi, frequently tell their U.S. counterparts that Taiwan is the first red line that must not be crossed in the U.S.-China relationship, but the Biden administration continues to ignore Chinese concerns. And I guess I do have some increasing concern that China may look at the situation in Ukraine and say to themselves that had Putin invaded Ukraine in 2014 and forced Kiev to agree to neutrality then and independence for the Donbass then, it would have been a far cheaper and a far easier operation for Russia. It wouldn't have changed anything between the U.S. and the Russian and Western U.S. relationship because through that time, no matter what Russia did, it received economic penalties and just hostility from the U.S. anyways. So, it's hard to think of anything over the past decade that Russia really needed the West for. And you really wonder if she thinks that, Putin's real mistake when it came to the war in Ukraine was waiting too long. Now, I'm not trying to necessarily just amplify the U.S. military's narrative that China is planning to invade Taiwan by 2027 or 2030. I don't know if China has a firm date on it, and I also know that Beijing often thinks in decades, if not centuries, and they're not rushing, right? Where they wouldn't necessarily launched a half-baked invasion of Taiwan. They would wait until China has such military superiority that they could easily blockade the island, sustaining relatively little casualties, and then force Taipei to sign an agreement. And so, China may still be thinking the long game, but I do have to imagine that to some extent, the war in Ukraine and the U.S. increasingly treating Taiwan like they treated Ukraine prior to the Russian invasion has to at least have some concerns for Beijing that the U.S. is trying to create a situation where Taiwan is essentially Japan and the U.S. will arm Taiwan to the teeth and make it absolutely impossible for China to ever retake the island, and that's going to embolden the Taiwanese to just straight declare independence in their own country, which would cross the Chinese red line and start a war. And so I guess there has to probably be even hawks within Beijing who are making that case to Xi all the time at this point. All right, let's talk about what's happening in the Middle East. This is some big news. Israel confirms its ground invasion of Lebanon has begun. Dave DeCamp wrote this for antiwar.com on September 30th. The Israeli military announced early Tuesday morning that its ground invasion of Lebanon has started, confirming earlier reports that the IDF soldiers were operating on the ground inside Lebanon. The IDF says its troops are conducting limited, localized, and targeted ground raids against Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon as Israeli airstrikes across the country continue. The raids come 1 week after heavy Israeli airstrikes killed over 1,000 people, including many civilians. While the Biden administration has claimed it wants a ceasefire in Lebanon, it's supportive of the Israeli invasion, and it says it was informed of the plan. A U.S. official told the Times of Israel that the administration has accepted Israel's goal of removing Hezbollah positions from near its northern border, but is concerned Israeli forces could get bogged down in Lebanon. Some U.S. officials are unhappy with President Biden's backing for Israel's escalations, with one telling the Huffington Post that the U.S. is permitting a nihilistic regional murder spree. A second U.S. official speaking with the HuffPo was asked about the claims that the ground invasion will be limited and said it will be big. Everyone who says it's going to be limited is a white man who thinks a million dead brown people is limited. While Hezbollah has been hit hard and its leadership has been decimated, the group says it's ready to fight the invading Israeli troops. The Hezbollah deputy, Sheikh Naim Qassam, said in a video, "We are quite ready. If the Israelis want a ground incursion, the resistance force are ready for that. Israel is committing massacres in all areas of Lebanon until there is no house left without traces of Israeli aggression in it. Israeli attacks civilians, ambulances, children, and the elderly. It does not fight fighters, but rather commits massacres." Qassam also took aim at the U.S., calling it a partner with Israel through unlimited military support, culturally, politically, and financially. The U.S. official speaking to the HuffPost said it was extremely unlikely that President Biden would veto Israel's invasion of Lebanon by leveraging military aid. The U.S. is seen as the only party that has the power to stop Israel's attack on Lebanon and its genocidal war in the Gaza Strip, which, of course, is where all of this is tied up. Hezbollah says we will stop the fighting against Israel. I guess once Israel stops bombing and stops the invasion of Lebanon as well. But they have said that, if Israel stops things in Gaza, then they would stop attacking Israel. And this was shown back in November when there was a short ceasefire. Hezbollah did stop attacks on Israel during that period. So, in an effort to show its support, the U.S. is sending a few thousand troops to the Middle East to defend Israel. The Pentagon said on Monday the U.S. is sending a few thousand additional troops to the Middle East to bolster security and prepare to defend Israel if needed. The deployment will include squadrons of F-15s, F-16s, F-22s, and A-10 fighter jets, and the other personnel needed to support them. The squadrons were initially deployed to the Middle East so that other fighter jets could rotate out, but now they will all stay to increase the U.S. air power. The day before the announcement, President Biden was asked if he would be sending troops to the Middle East and replied no. The deployment comes after Israel killed Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, and the Israeli slaughter of hundreds of Lebanese civilians since Israel dramatically escalated its bombing campaign in Lebanon last week. The U.S. support for Israel's attacks on Lebanon could provoke attacks on U.S. forces in the region, or the U.S. could intervene directly to defend Israel. The Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh said that the deployment was for the protection of U.S. forces and not to assist in evacuations. Last week, the U.S. said it was bolstering its forces in the region should we need to come to the defense of Israel. On Sunday, the Pentagon announced Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin ordered an aircraft carrier strike group and an amphibious assault group to stay in the region. The Pentagon has also issued a warning to Iran on Sunday, saying the Secretary of Defense made clear that should Iran or its partners or proxies use this moment to target American personnel or interests in the region, the United States will take every necessary measure to defend our people. Now, there's one more interesting thing going on here that I just wanted to point out, and I think it could be significant in the long run, could not be, but the White House has really downplayed the need to evacuate what I think are tens of thousands of Americans. There's certainly hundreds of thousands of people who have Western citizenship that at least at some point in time live in Lebanon. I'm not sure how many of those have left over the past year as the tit for tat strikes between Israel and Lebanon have slowly escalated and gone on. Maybe a lot of these people are out of the country, but I know at one point Canada was looking at evacuating tens of thousands, France as well. And so there could be a lot of Westerners who are potentially caught up in the crossfire here in Lebanon, or at least people with Western passports. And you would think there would be some interest from the White House and from the United States in helping these people, but the White House has largely downplayed the need to have any kind of special U.S. government help, saying that commercial flights are available for people who want to leave. Now, I think the White House is only doing this to downplay the threat to civilians in Lebanon. If we're having to evacuate our people from Lebanon because of the Israeli invasion, then doesn't that look a little bit like what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine? And doesn't that mean that something Israel is doing here isn't right? I think it really does signify that. So I think that even that is a part of the Biden administration's propaganda effort here to downplay what's going on in Lebanon. And this time it could get Americans, Canadians, and others killed. All right, next up here, Netanyahu says regime change in Iran will happen a lot sooner than people think. So the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a warning to Iran on Monday, saying regime change will happen in the country a lot sooner than people think. Netanyahu made the threat in a video post on X that he said it was a message to the Iranian people. When Iran is finally free, and that moment will come a lot sooner than people think, everything will be different. Our two ancient peoples, the Jewish people and the Persian people, will finally be at peace. Our two countries, Israel and Iran, will be at peace. And by the way, he didn't deliver that message in Farsi, he delivered it in English. So I think this is a message to the American people, getting them ready for Israel's next fight after they, I guess Netanyahu assumes he gets done with Hezbollah going after Iran. So Netanyahu said that Iran's puppets were being eliminated and warned there's nowhere in the Middle East that Israel cannot reach. He said, with every passing moment, the regime is bringing you, the noble Persian people, closer to the abyss. The warning from Netanyahu comes amid soaring tensions in the Middle East following Israel's dramatic escalation in Lebanon, which has killed over 1,000 people since September 23rd, including Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and many Lebanese civilians. A senior member of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, was killed alongside Nasrallah, and Tehran has vowed that it would respond. Netanyahu seems eager to expand the conflict in the Middle East, and the U.S. is deploying more troops and other military assets for the purpose of deploying Israel if the situation escalates. And so I want to just take a second here and propose a situation. And I have said time and time again on this show that I think Benjamin Netanyahu understands the American political landscape better than anyone else. There might be some people like Steve Bannon, I think, does very well, but as far as world leaders go, or the average person who's really able to weigh in and tip the scales, I think it really is Netanyahu who understands this better than almost anyone. So now, this is what maybe Israel is doing here. And so think about this. Netanyahu is going to dramatically escalate the war and maybe start a regional war in the Middle East on purpose. Now, this is going to harm Kamala Harris's re-election chances. However, between now and the election, if the Biden administration does anything that at all attempts to rein in the Israelis and Netanyahu, well, then the Republicans are going to attack the Democrats for that. Now, I think there is a way that Kamala Harris and the Democrats could defend themselves from those attacks and appeal to the American people. I don't think she's capable of doing that. I don't think the Democrats want to do that. I think they want to try to be more supportive of Israel than Trump. And so no matter how far Netanyahu escalates between now and November 5th, so he's got 5 more weeks to do it, the U.S. is going to back those escalations no matter what. Now, even better for Netanyahu, I think, if this ends up helping Donald Trump to get elected, right? So if the U.S. ends up embroiled, or if there is a major Middle East war in the next couple of weeks, I think that's going to really hurt Kamala Harris's chances. If, people are on the news talking about the prospect of World War III, they're going to blame the current administration for that, and rightly so. And I'll get into that in a second, why Biden and Harris, of course, are all to blame for all of this. However, if Trump gets elected, I think once again, Netanyahu is going to see that to his advantage. Now, maybe Israel doesn't get kind of the blank check for support for endless escalations when you have a real president in charge other than Biden, who's effectively been a lame duck his entire presidency, but really the past 2 months here since he announced he wasn't running for re-election, then there may be some constraints on what Israel could do once either the election is over or Trump takes office in January. However, I don't think Netanyahu thinks, and I think he is correct here, that Trump is going to pull back on Israel. So let's say Israel is already at war in Lebanon. Trump is going to help support Israel in any way possible to wage that war in Lebanon. Now, if Trump took office and Israel wasn't already at war in Lebanon, I think there's a chance that Trump would actually try to constrain Netanyahu there and try to push Israel not to go to war in Lebanon. So I think that this is basically the calculation that Netanyahu is playing out here, which is he is going to escalate at least through November, probably through January, knowing that once Trump takes office, because of his escalations, that's going to play a fairly large role in all of this, that then, he's probably going to have to say, all right, I've gotten what I could get. From October 7th until January 20th of 2025, Netanyahu is going to be able to expand the war. After that, again, the Harris administration, the Trump administration may say, look, we're not going to stop supporting the war in Lebanon. You're already at war in Lebanon. We're going to make sure you have everything you need to wage that war in Lebanon. But we're not okay with you expanding this war to Iran or expanding the ethnic cleansing in Gaza between the northern Gaza, it's beyond the northern Gaza Strip or something like that. So I think that is Netanyahu's play in all of this. Now, I want to talk about the U.S. and Biden's role in all of this. This is my Libertarian Institute debrief from September 30th, 2024. This one titled, Israel is set to invade Lebanon and it's Joe Biden's fault. Israeli tanks and soldiers are prepared to march across the Jewish state's northern border and bring destruction to southern Lebanon. Many foreign policy analysts have warned since October 7th that the tit-for-tat strikes between Hezbollah and Israel could turn into a full-blown war. It appears that conflict has arrived nearly a year later. This war could have been prevented by Washington. The Joe Biden administration has insisted it wished to avert the war and bring calm to the region, but concurrently provided Tel Aviv with billions of dollars in arms. From the start of the onslaught in Gaza, it was clear that the arms were being used to ethnically cleanse the Strip. The White House proposed ceasefire deals that Hamas accepted and Tel Aviv rejected. Still, Biden kept the arms flowing. For months, it has been clear that Israel was gearing up for a war with Hezbollah. The White House asked Tel Aviv to de-escalate, and Netanyahu ordered major terrorist attacks, the carpet bombing of civilian areas, and a ground invasion, and still Biden kept the arms flowing. Do you see the problem here? The White House says it wants ceasefires and for the killing of civilians to end, yet Biden keeps the weapons flowing. Is Biden too senile to realize what is happening? That may be the problem. However, there are all the, quote, adults in the room who we were told would be responsible stewards of the world empire, fostering peace, stability, and democracy. But Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Brett McGurk, and Lloyd Austin have given Netanyahu a blank check, a hall pass, and a green light for his genocidal rampage in Gaza that is on the brink of now setting the entire region on fire. At any time, Biden or his fellow adults could have pulled the plug on the killing with a simple phone call to Netanyahu. The message would be the killing stops or you lose Washington support. Several former Israeli leaders and top military officials have admitted that Tel Aviv is entirely dependent on Washington's military support to maintain its armed forces. It's not just that Biden is passively allowing the killing in Gaza and the bombardment of Lebanon, he's actively enabling it with American dollars and arms. And so if you want to sign up for my newsletter, you can head on over to the Libertarian Institute. The sign up is right there in the top right corner of the webpage. I got a pretty nice shout out yesterday from Ron Paul on the Liberty Report. So Ron Paul seems to enjoy it. You probably will too. All right. a little bit of a wrap up here on the past 24 hours. Israeli strikes on Lebanon kill at least 95 people in one day. Lebanon's health ministry has reported that Israeli strikes across Lebanon on Monday killed at least 95 people as the relentless bombing continues. So the ministry wrote on X, the Israeli enemy raids in the past 24 hours on towns and villages in southern Lebanon and the capital of Beirut have resulted in the death of 95 people and the injuries of 172. Since Israel dramatically escalated its bombing campaign last week, Israeli strikes have killed 1,000 people in Lebanon. Many civilians have been killed, and the health ministry said that nearly a quarter of the dead are women and children. Reuters reported on Monday that an Israeli airstrike on September 25th hit two houses in a village north of Beirut, and displaced families gathered in the houses because the village had been attacked by Israel in previous wars. But on September 25th, Israeli bombs struck two houses, killing 16 people, including 14 women and children. 30 people were wounded in the strike, about half of them children. Local officials told Reuters that one house was the residence of a Hezbollah fighter who was killed in the battle in August, and a former fighter who had lost a leg in battle but was there at the time, but no active combatants were present. Residential homes were Israel's primary target when its escalation began last week. Israeli officials claimed homes were being used to store Hezbollah weapons, but offer no actual evidence for the claim. As a result of the strategy, the Lebanese health minister said the overwhelming majority, if not all, of the 558 people killed by Israeli airstrikes on September 23rd were civilians. Now, in Gaza, the killing continues there as well. Israeli forces kill another 20 Palestinians in Gaza. So the Gaza Health Ministry reported on Monday that Israeli forces killed at least 20 Palestinians and wounded 108 in the previous 24-hour period. The latest violence brings the ministry's death toll to 41,615 and the number of wounded to 96,359. The ministry's numbers are an undercount since they only include the dead and wounded who arrive at hospitals and morgues and don't account for the Palestinians who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble, or people who are wounded and who don't have a hospital to go to. There are still a number of victims under the rubble and on the streets, and ambulance and civil defense crews cannot reach them, the Gaza Health Ministry reported on Telegram. Israel attacks on Monday included a strike in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza that hit the home of Wafa Alumdini, a well-known English-speaking reporter who worked with the Palestine Chronicle. The strike killed her husband and their two children. And so in the past day, I think Israel has killed journalists in 3 countries. This journalist in Gaza, there was a journalist in downtown Damascus that was targeted with an airstrike. And I believe I saw a report that a journalist was killed in Lebanon as well. So the Israeli slaughter certainly continues. Now, last story up here on today's show, Yemen's Houthis shoot down another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone. So the Houthis said Monday their forces shot down another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone while it was operating over Yemen. The Houthi military spokesperson said the air defenses of the Yemeni armed forces shot down an American MQ-9 aircraft while it was carrying out hostile missions in the airspace above the Sada government. The spokesman said the downing marked the 11th U.S. MQ-9 that the Houthis have shot down over Yemen since last year. U.S. officials confirmed to CNN that the drone was shot down. Now, I guess I don't find it unsurprising that if the Houthis over the past year had shot down 1, maybe 2 of these MQ-9s, I would have guessed that the Houthis have somewhat limited anti-aircraft capabilities and that the U.S. is probably able to target their anti-aircraft systems. And so whatever anti-aircraft systems they are able to deploy and use are probably fairly limited. And so things like having the drones fly higher or using different types of drones like Global Hawks that have further range would have essentially solved this problem, and that the U.S. wouldn't have allowed the Houthis to destroy over $300 million in MQ-9 Reaper drones. However, that seems to be what's happening, that the U.S. can prevent the Houthis from continuing to just knock its MQ-9s out of the sky. And again, these are about $30 million each, and that doesn't include whatever kind of payload they had, if they have a bunch of Hellfire missiles attached or something like that. So the Houthis downed the drone after Israel launched airstrikes against the Yemeni port of Hodeidah, damaging infrastructure and killing about 5 people. Israel said the strikes were a response to the Houthis firing ballistic missiles at Tel Aviv. So on Monday, the Houthi spokesperson said the Israeli enemy, with American support, launched 17 strikes on various civilian facilities in Hodeidah, including the port and the power station, which led to the martyrdom of 5 civilians and the injury of 57 as a final tally. So one thing I think that's interesting about the Houthi involvement in this conflict is a lot of the Yemeni infrastructure has been devastated. And Yemen was, a much poorer country than, say, Lebanon or Iran before even the Saudi bombardment of Yemen started in 2015. And that continued for 7 years. It took out a lot of the food infrastructure, medical facilities, housing. I mean, they just laid to waste large swaths of Yemen during their bombing campaign. Critical infrastructure like bridges in remote areas were taken out. Again, cholera treatment centers, things like this were all taken out in the Saudi bombing campaign. And so I'm sure to some extent for the Houthis, there's a lot less of a downside than there is for, say, Hezbollah or Iran to launch a major military campaign against Israel, simply because there's less to destroy and there's less to rebuild in Yemen than there is in Lebanon or Beirut or Tehran. And so you want, and I'm not saying that the people of Yemen have nothing and it doesn't mean anything if their cities are destroyed or obliterated, just that the estimated cost to get from where they are now to to get back to where they are now from a post-Israeli bombing campaign is going to be significantly less than, say, for Tehran or Beirut. And so I imagine that's like a part of everybody's calculations here when they decide how many attacks and how they're going to attack Israel. And it's just interesting that the role that the Houthis have been able to play in the Middle East over the past 8 years or so. They initially foiled Hillary Clinton's plans to establish the Yemen that she wanted, right? She organized a one-man election and put Mansour Hadi in charge of Yemen, and the Houthis ran him out of power. They took over the capital city, and then the Saudis attempted to dislodge the Houthis from power, and they won the war. And then they made alliances with the old leader of Yemen, Salah, and when he tried to betray them to the Saudis, they killed him and they just consolidated power from there. And then when the Saudis finally had to end their years-long war in Yemen and Israel started their ruthless bombing campaign at Gaza, the Houthis stopped international shipping through the Red Sea. And I guess Israel has probably inflicted more damage on Hodeidah than the Houthis have in Tel Aviv, but the Houthis have carried out some pretty serious attacks in Tel Aviv. A drone strike that hit Tel Aviv, a missile strike that hit Tel Aviv, apparently a hypersonic missile. These are pretty significant attacks on Israel that the Houthis have carried out, and it seems that in a very crazy way, something like Star Wars, these are the Ewoks, right? Where you think it's going to be an easy fight, but they're able to just fight and claw and really harm the Empire. And so it seems like that's going to continue here. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Back with more later in the week.